Hi everybody, I'm here. Welcome back to In Conversation with ATF. My guest today is a writer. He is a man who has met, actually, I don't know why my face has gone sort of like very bright. I think it's because my blinds are open. Because it's still daylight here. It's like 7:10 in the evening and it's still daylight over here. So, you know. But this is a man who I just found out has met Bill Scott. He has worked on he's written, he's been the head writer for many shows such as the animated RoboCop cartoon, a lot of the DC animated shows like Superman the Animated Series, the new Batman Adventures, Batman Beyond, Justice League, the Zeta Project, Justice League, and he's also written for shows such as the 13 Ghosts of Scooby-Doo, the Smurfs, Muppet Babies, Gummi Bears, the original the Gummi Bears, which he actually produced. Okay. So this is a big one. This is a big one. DuckTales, Goof Troop, Transformers Animated, Ben 10, Alien Force, Ultimate Spider-Man, Octonauts, which is over here, very popular, as well as films such as Star Fairies, I Yabba Dabba Doo, Holly Rockabye Baby, and so much more. My guess is Rich Fogel.
Hi, nice to meet you.
It's nice to meet you too. Oh my gosh. First of all, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great. If you hear some background noise, we're having some work done on our solar panels, so just ignore that.
Okay. Well, that's good. If you're okay, then I'm okay. That is wonderful. Right. Okay. So I've got to jump right in and ask. Tell me your story of meeting Bill Scott.
It was well, first of all, let me back up and say that I was a huge fan of Rocky and Bullwinkle, and it was a big influence on me growing up. I mean,
yeah,
when I was growing up, I was one of those kids who would, get out the bowl of cereal and sit down and watch cartoons every day. And I would watch Hanna-Barbera cartoons, Huckleberry Hound, Yogi Bear, and stuff like that. I would watch Rocky and Bullwinkle, which I absolutely loved. And I watched, whatever was on. Which was the old Warner Brothers cartoons, the Tom and Jerry cartoons, Popeye cartoons, and so sort of that was my childhood. Those were all of the things that were, and of course comic books. I read a lot of comic books, which my mom always said, "Why are you wasting your time reading comic books?" Later on, I was able to say, "See, it was not a waste of time.
It worked out. It worked out."
So it was interesting to me, growing up, I was a big fan of all this stuff, but I had no particular connection with the industry or anything like that. I didn't know, I began to notice that some of the same names began to crop up over and over again in the credits. And I was like, I wonder who those people are and stuff like that. But at the time, there was you couldn't major in animation in school. There were no animation programs or anything like that. And I made my own animated films just to learn a little bit about how to do animation. I'm going to get to Bill Scott eventually. So
I'll hold on till then.
I just wanted to give a little bit of background to that.
Yeah, that's fine.
But what was remarkable to me was that over the years, I ended up meeting and or working with a lot of the people whose work I really enjoyed while I was growing up. And it was amazing to me that somehow I ended up in the middle of all that. And it sort of seemed like that was what was meant to be for me. So Bill Scott, well, I, as you mentioned, I worked on Gummi Bears, and one of the actors on Gummi Bears was the legendary June Foray, who was the voice of Rocket J. Squirrel. And so I was thrilled. It was oh my gosh, I'm working with Rocky, and she was just the nicest person in the world. She was so enthusiastic about animation and the people who worked in animation. And she was a huge supporter of animation. She was the president of or the chairman of whatever the animation branch of the Motion Picture Academy was. So she was very involved in promoting animation. And I worked with her on the Smurfs also. That's where I first worked with her. So, but I got to know her really well. And I remember one time I was at LAX, I was flying someplace, and suddenly I heard this very distinctive voice calling out over the crowd going, Rich, Rich. And I was like, it turned and there's June Foray. So she was going someplace with her sister, and I gave her a big hug, and we chatted and went on the way. So it was really nice to sort of meet the faces behind that.
Yeah.
So Bill Scott, I think it was a Television Academy mixer, where the animation branch occasionally just sort of throws a party and gets people together. And Bill was there, and I was really thrilled to meet him, because he's not only was he the voice of Bullwinkle, but he was the head writer also. And, a lot of that humor came directly from him. And I'm going to digress again for just a slight moment here before I get to the punchline on this.
Don't worry.
At the time, animation was very depressed. That in the sort of late 70s, early 80s, the people who had been working in animation had been working in it for 30, 40 years, and they were beginning to retire. And so they needed warm bodies to come in and work. And so there were a whole bunch of new people who had been brought in, like me, to just sort of like work in the salt mines, as it were. And we were all the first generation of sort of animation enthusiasts who were working on it. And we knew the history of the animation, and we knew the people who had worked in it and stuff like that. So we were huge fans. And so when I met Bill, I was like, oh my gosh, I'm such a big fan of Rocky and Bullwinkle and George of the Jungle and Fractured Fairy Tales and all that stuff. It's just, it had such an influence on me, and it stuck with me because they wrote what I call over and under, that they wrote a lot of very silly, slapsticky stuff for the young kids. And then they wrote a lot of very sophisticated verbal humor for the adults. And so as you rewatched it, you got new things out of it every time you watched it. So I was going on and gushing about it. And Bill at this point was not long before he died. And he was like very sour on the business at this point. And he was like, oh, it's terrible. It's never going to be that way again. It's never going to, there's never going to be anything good. And I was like, no, you don't understand. There's all these new people who've just come in who have been influenced by you. And there's going to be, new great cartoons being made. And he was like, I don't think so. I don't think so. And it was like, oh, that just broke my heart that the industry had, worn him down to that degree. But I certainly understood where he was coming from, because he had endured so much in the industry and had not really been rewarded for it or appreciated for it. So, I'm glad that you did your documentary. I'm glad that people, know who he is and remember him. And, I don't know whether you got your picture taken in front of the Rocky and Bullwinkle statue on Sunset.
I did.
But, that's sort of a pilgrimage right there. And, I remember when it was at its original location in front of the Jay Ward Studios. And Jay Ward was a very quirky guy. And he opened a store next door to the studio where they could sell the cells and sort of merchandise and stuff like that. And I remember going in there and buying Bullwinkle greeting cards from Jay Ward. He was working the counter.
Yeah, it would usually be him or his wife, Billy, who would be working the counter. The Dudley Do-Right Emporium, it shut down roughly around 2004-ish.
Yeah. Anyway, so it was like, this is amazing. I'm buying greeting cards from Jay Ward.
Did you ever get to see the elbow prints that they did for the opening of the statue?
Yeah, I did.
I thought so. Yeah, I was gonna say because they're on a sort of an abandoned property now on Sunset Boulevard, but there is a way. I'm not gonna reveal publicly, but there is a way to get in through there is a secret door that sort of goes onto that sort of area, and I actually got to see the elbow prints up close. So it was like I had June's elbow print, Paul Frees, Hans Conried, all these different media people, publicists who came out at the time and stuff, journalists. It was very cool. And the fact I was with Bill's son John at the time we actually got to see those elbow prints. It was so awesome. It was really
Oh,
lovely to
that's
see.
amazing.
I know, it was like a once in a lifetime experience. So I was saying to John, look, even if we don't get in, at least I'm sort of standing in the vicinity of them. And then we found this door, and they were like, it's probably not going to be open. And then John's wife Tina tries it. I'm like, it's open. So actually, we just scurry around now, and I'm like, oh my gosh, it's the aforementioned elbow prints, and like they've been on this derelict property for about over 5-10 years, and I'm just like, wow. I mean, to preserve them, I mean, you'd have to take them out, but then again, taking them out of the ground, you do more damage to them. So
Yeah.
I don't know. Who knows? Well, the council will think of a way, hopefully. But yeah, honestly, that is a really interesting story because a lot of no one really sort of talked about Bill being sort of gruff. I mean, I never heard from anyone else about his views on the animation industry that were sort of, oh, they're bringing in new people and stuff. I'd never heard that one before. So that would have been an interesting thing to put in the documentary, like he was, dubious of newcomers in the industry, sort of something like that.
I don't think he was necessarily dubious of the newcomers. I think he was dubious of the people who were in charge of animation, and he didn't think that the creative people could have much of an impact.
Well, I'm actually turning that documentary into a book. Do I have your permission to quote this interview for the book?
Sure.
Awesome, awesome. Thank you, Rich. Okay, so of course you sort of explained to me how you got started in the business, but what was your first ever writing job for, as in cartoon? Was it, I presume it's for Hanna-Barbera, maybe?
Yes, it was. But I worked in the animation industry before that. I like I said, in school and in college, I sort of taught myself animation. And then I went to the American Film Institute and studied cinematography. And when I got out, I was kicking around Hollywood and looking for a job, and I couldn't find anything anywhere. And then I went to the movies one night, and I ran into an old college roommate of mine named Sam Simon, who later on became one of the co-creators of The Simpsons. And he at the time was working as a writer at an animation studio out in the Valley called Filmation.
Oh, Filmation.
And he said, what are you doing? And I said, well, I'm looking for work. And he said, I hear they're looking for storyboard artists at Filmation. And I said, well, I can draw. So I went and applied for a job at Filmation. And as I mentioned before, this was a period of time when the people who had been working in animation for years and years were retiring, and they needed warm bodies. Literally anybody walking in the door could get a job there pretty much. And so they gave me a tryout in storyboard, and I was there for 3-4 years, something like that, working on things like Fat Albert and Flash Gordon and Mighty Mouse and Zorro and Shazam and stuff like that. And I worked my way up to being the storyboard supervisor on some of those shows. But the real challenge that I enjoyed the work, but the real challenge that I had was that a lot of the scripts were not very good. A lot of them were written by people who were sort of at the ends of their careers and had come up writing in radio and stuff like that, and they just didn't have a lot of the sort of snap that you like in your animation. And so the storyboard department was mostly made up of people this was their first job, and it was sort of like a fraternity house. It was like these crazy people who loved animation and were super creative. And for the first time, I sort of felt like I had found my people. So we would take these scripts and we would cut out the dialogue into just like little strips of paper. And then we would rearrange them and sort of rebuild the script just using the dialogue that we had, because they had already recorded the dialogue. And so we would restructure scenes. We would do, basically a whole new script based on the scripts that we were getting, but reorganizing them. And it was a lot of work. And finally, after a while, I was like, well, I think I could do better than this. And so I started, by this point, I was working freelance and doing freelance boards for Hanna-Barbera. And I started pitching stories there. And I heard that the Smurfs, which was a juggernaut at that point and was producing 90 minutes of original programming a week, was in desperate need of writers. So I went in and I pitched some Smurf ideas, and they liked them, and I started writing there. And so my first produced script was a Smurf script, and shortly after that, I got called in to work on Super Friends. So they had some new story editors who were looking for work. Alan Burnett was one of them. And so I wrote some Super Friends. And so within a year or so, I was on staff full time at Hanna-Barbera writing Smurfs.
Wow.
So that's sort of how I got my start in the business. And, you know, it was a trial by fire. We had, like I said, 90 minutes a week to do this. And before that, the animation industry had been sort of like migrant farm work. You would come in, you would do the work for like 9 months or something like that, and then they would lay you off with sort of an understanding that you would come back 3 months later and work some more. So it was just sort of this cycle of work. But you know, once I got on staff at Hanna-Barbera, it was full time, because they would do the season, and then you would do development in the off season, and you would just sort of keep going that way. So, but there again, it was an opportunity for me to work directly with Bill Hanna and Joe Barbera, who were two of the people who were really influential on me as I was growing up.
Oh yeah, definitely. Yeah. And honestly, like the renaissance of animation was definitely sort of the 80s, because obviously you had the turning point with like the Disney afternoon shows coming out and all these sort of Hanna-Barbera shows. Like they started making like shows, if you get what I mean, like sort of based off, of course, Smurfs were pre-existing characters, you know, like some shows from the past were, you know, original created characters by Hanna-Barbera. And then, of course, as you mentioned, Super Friends, of course, DC animated. I keep saying, of course, I do apologize. Did you ever get to meet any of the voice actors from any show at Hanna-Barbera
Oh, sure.
or Filmation? Really?
Oh, yeah. Not so much at Filmation. The Filmation was sort of a walled off thing where you would just you would do your work and it would be passed off to the next department. And so there was never any sort of interaction between the departments. At Hanna-Barbera, the writers were very valued, and we were at every single recording session.
Wow.
So yeah, I got to meet all the people who worked on Smurfs and stuff like that, and it was always a joy, because as a television writer, an animation writer, those performances were really the only time that you got to see your work performed live, and so that's when it really came to life. And Gordon Hunt was the voice director. He was extraordinary, and he was Andrea Romano's mentor. And as a matter of fact, Andrea directed the first Smurf script that I wrote.
That's awesome.
I was invited to do it, and Gordon was busy that day, and she was his assistant, and so she was filling in, and she directed. And I remember at one point I'm just sitting there wide-eyed at this, and at one point she turned at me and she said, "How do you want this line read?" And I looked at it, and it was something that the story editors had put in after my draft of it, and I was like, well, I have no idea what that's supposed to be. But we figured it out. Anyway, so yes, Andrea and I have a very long history together. But there were certain tricks that you had to learn. We had Jonathan Winters played Grandpa Smurf in there, and he was an improv comedian, and we had to always schedule an extra half hour whenever Jonathan came in during the rehearsals, so that he could tell stories for half an hour. That was just like what we, and they were always brilliant. I mean, it was like he would have everybody in tears on the floor. But a lot of the cast for the Smurfs, the guest cast and the regular cast, were people whose background were in radio and in vaudeville and, you know, real old timers like that. And so when they got together, there would always be this sort of competitive storytelling and joke telling, and they would always be trying to top each other. And it was just, you know, the rehearsal sessions were way more entertaining than the episodes were.
Wow, sorry, I'm looking at the corner of my eye because like my bedroom window is sort of parallel to my neighbor's roof, and there's just two pigeons just kind of walking down the roof, and they've just gone in the gutter, and oh my gosh, one of them's just flown towards the window. I am so sorry. I'm sorry. I need to focus. There we go. Okay, there we go. Yeah, it's just so interesting, you know, just but like I get caught with, you know, different things, and you know, it kind of distracts me. Yes, that's what I was going to say, because I had a question in mind and then it kind of just like floated out. I was looking at those pigeons just walking down the roof. You said you met the regular cast. Do you remember meeting a lady called named Noelle North?
Oh, sure.
Well, Noelle is one of my closest friends. She was also the slouchy Smurfling. But
yes.
Wow, we met.
She is lovely. I love Noelle.
Oh, I never knew that you know her. That is she was so nice to me. Like she helped me with my Bill documentary. We met when I flew out to LA. Like she was the first voice actress I met. So I got to LA, went up to Burbank, and she came to the hotel in the evening, and I was shaking like a leaf. I was like, "Oh my god, hi!" I was nearly at tears. But the next day we actually did the Warner Brothers tour together.
Oh, how nice.
So they had like a massive wall of animation and stuff like that. And Smurfs was mentioned. I was like, oh, no, look, you've got your own mark at the studio. You've got your own sort of sign sort of thing. But yeah, it was honestly just, wow, she was just out of this world.
Yes, I worked with her on Smurfs a little bit, and then a lot on Gummi Bears.
Oh, of course, you did Gummi Bears, yeah. Oh, sorry. I'm not properly switched on today. It's been a bit of a weird, funny day. But yeah, Gummi Bears I like to talk to you about because I know Jim Magan, who produced did the first 2 seasons, then Tad Stones took over, and then you took over for the final 3 seasons. So
yes, with Mark Seidenberg. With Mark
Seidenberg, yes. So tell me what it was like to work on that show, because obviously this was after Bill had died, because he worked on Gummi Bears. It was only in the first season. But yeah, tell me all the stories and everything I need to know about your time working with the Gummi Bears.
Oh, well, Gummi Bears was at the time Disney was sort of making their first forays into TV animation, and they were very reluctant to do it because they were the gold standard of animation, and they didn't want to do anything that was going to tarnish the Disney label. And so they were very careful about doing it. And they had started with, a couple of things, but DuckTales was their first sort of big hit. And Gummi Bears was done sort of around that same time. And Jim Magan and Art Vitello produced the first season of it. And at the time I was working at Marvel on Muppet Babies and RoboCop. And Mark and I were sort of the hot writer team of the moment at that point. And so Disney came calling and offered us a lot of money, which was nice, and said, you have a choice. You have a choice. You can take over DuckTales, or you can do Gummi Bears. And we were like, that's a tough choice. They're both great shows. But we chose Gummi Bears, which I think was, in a way, the safe choice for us, because it was more like a return to the world of Smurfs that we had been doing. It was the sort of fairy tale, medieval thing, but we liked doing that. And so we got into it, and I loved the show. I loved doing all the characters. I thought it had been a well-developed show and a beautifully produced show. But at the time that we got into it, the network had some issues with the creative directions that it had gone, so we had to sort of come smooth all of that out. And then they announced they were going to be doing the Disney afternoon, and suddenly we had a gazillion more episodes to do. And so it was a lot of fun. We worked closely with David Block, who was the animation producer on it. Mark and I developed the stories, worked with our writing staff. We had a really good writing staff. And then, we were at all the recordings. So we worked with, all of the great cast members that were in that. And it was always a joy to do that. And they were so enthusiastic about it. And then I do remember that in Gummy Bears was one of the early roles that Rob Paulson had nabbed.
Yes.
And so we got to work with Rob very early on, and we were like, this guy's a lot of fun at a session. And he's a great singer also. And so we actually were able to put some songs in there for him to sing. And so, yeah, Gummy Bears was great, and I'm very proud of the work that we were able to do on it. I mean, it was hard. It was very hard work because of the schedules and and the sort of relentless drive for quality. But I think that is often what gets your best work out.
Yeah, definitely. Well, I'm glad to hear that, because Gummy Bears is one of my all-time favorite shows. So that is a lovely, lovely, lovely thing to hear from you, Rich.
Yeah, it's unfortunately it's one of those things that because Disney does not own it 100%, it was based on a candy from Germany, that Disney does not promote it as much as they do some of their other fully owned character stuff. But at the time, it was really fun because they had some Gummy Bear walk around characters at Disneyland. So I was able to see those, and they had a little like motorboat ride that they had rebranded as the Gummy Glen thing. So there was a little bit of an impact at the park temporarily for that. So that was fun also.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that it got a few home media releases as well, because I own 4 VHS tapes of Gummy Bears. First season, though, I think it was only really the first season that was released on VHS here in the UK. I don't think we ever got it on DVD, but it's all on Disney Plus now, so you can just literally just go on it and just watch it, and it's right there for you. Yeah, so honestly, like, I'm still looking at your resume. It is just, I am still astounded. But I want to make the big jump now, from Disney to Warner Brothers. Now, first of all, I noticed you have some Batman and Superman figures, or little pieces on the back on your little mantelpiece, as well as 2 Emmy Awards. So first of all, I'd love to hear about the Emmy Awards. What show were they for, and tell me all about them. Tell me everything. I need to know.
Well, I mentioned to you earlier that I had worked with Alan Burnett on Super Friends, and we worked together on and off over the years. He was at Disney when I was at Disney, and then he was he was on Smurfs with me at Hanna-Barbera. He was back at Hanna-Barbera when Mark and I were working on the Flintstone specials. And then he got an opportunity to go to Warner Brothers and work on Batman the Animated Series, which was very exciting. But unfortunately, at the time, I was committed to working on other projects, and so I wasn't able to go over and work on Batman, which I was really disappointed about because I was a big Batman fan. But then then they started up the Superman animated series, and he was like, "Hey, you want to write a Superman?" And I'm like, "Heck yes, I'd love to." So I wrote the first regular episode that had Brainiac in it, Stolen Memories.
Stolen Memories, yes.
And they liked that, and so I did a bunch more Superman episodes in the first season, and then they brought me on as a story editor in the second season of Superman. So that's sort of how I got into it. And while I was there, the decision was made that they were going to do more Batman episodes, and I was like,
Ooh.
"More Batman episodes!"
Yay!
So even though I missed out on the sort of first round, I got to work on the next round of Batman episodes, and that was really thrilling for me. And as a matter of fact, I wrote what, in sort of production order, was the last episode of Batman. So in a sense, I killed Batman.
No, go ahead.
That's okay. Anyway, so one of the Emmys is for the Superman Batman Adventures.
Wow.
And the
which
other
one is that, on your left or your right?
Yeah, I'm not sure which one is which. Anyway, and the other one is for Batman Beyond.
Right. So were they in the writing category, or I presume they were in
they were for the show, and so as sort of the staff writers and producers of the show, we got Emmys. These days they've got it, I think, broken down. They got the writing broken out as a separate category, but back then it was just sort of like, here's the show, everybody who worked on it.
Wow, yeah, because I was wondering, because when shows get nominated and there's like multiple people listed under the nomination. For example, there's you and Andrea Romano, Paul Dini, and Bruce Timm. I've always wondered, and I hope you can answer this for me, when that happens and the Emmy is won, does only one person get to keep the Emmy, or is an Emmy made for each individual person?
No, one is made for each individual person. So
wow, that is awesome.
So there's a they announce the awards, and there's a table backstage that has just hundreds of Emmys on it, and you go and you pick yours up, and there's a little ring on the bottom of it, which then is inscribed later, and they mail that to you, and then you put it onto the statue so that it has your name on it and the name of the show that you. So, but yeah, there's this sort of sea of Emmys out there, and I remember with the I think it was with the Superman one, ours was the last category of the evening. And so when we got backstage, the Emmys were sort of pretty picked over. There were not very many left. And I think the one that I had a little bit of a dent in the atomic ball on the top. And I thought, well, that's okay. It gives it a little bit of character.
Yeah, it makes it very unique to one's character. Yes. I noticed the Batman statue on your mantelpiece. Could that be the same sort of Batman statue that they released in the Warner Brothers stores?
It's similar. It was all of these were ones that were produced for the production crew.
Oh, right, I see. Okay, because I was going to say, because I saw one like that, but it had an oval base, and it was signed by Kevin Conroy. But it had like a little. It was like a grey base, and it had like a black bat symbol on it. That describes it in the best way. Yeah,
so they used basically the same sculpture for it, but they did a commercial version. But this is the one these are the ones that were done for the production crew.
So I presume they did the Batman, Superman, Robin, and then Terry McGinnis, or were there more?
I don't remember a Terry McGinnis one.
I was going to say, because I saw the Terry McGinnis one behind you, and I was thinking, is that a cast and crew statue, or is that just a regular figure?
Yeah, no, that's a cast and crew one. Oh, Batman Beyond, that one. Yeah, they also made an old Bruce Wayne one, which I didn't get, that one.
Oh, wow.
And I've also got a whole set of them that were done for Justice League that has all the main 7 characters on that. So.
Oh my gosh. Now, literally, just to see all this collection together was like, it must be so awesome. Like, unfortunately, they didn't really have a lot of animation stuff at the studio tour, the Warner Brothers one that I did. But at the end, they had like a lot of the Emmys sort of displayed on a wall, and one of them was for Batman the Animated Series. So I guess that counts.
Yep, I guess so.
So. Yeah, definitely. So, right, I've got to say, the voice actors of course, Superman and Batman and stuff like that, just like what was it like working with them? Because of course, Stolen Memories, the episode you wrote, Corey Burton voiced Brainiac, he was also in Gummy Bears, and then you've got Kevin Conroy, who was the voice of Batman, Tim Daly, Superman, Dana Delaney, Lois Lane, just all these people that you probably met. Just wow.
Well, I mean, of course, Corey I had worked with since Smurfs days. I mean, he was somebody who had studied under Dawes Butler.
Yes.
The voice of Huckleberry Hound. And so, I mean, he was an animation fan, and he learned how to do those voices. And so one of his trademark voices that he does, that is sort of what the basis of the Brainiac voice is, sort of his impression of Paul Frees, his announcer voice. And so yeah, it was sort of like old home week with doing the Brainiac thing, because it was like, oh, Corey's here, great. I feel comfortable. So no, the recording sessions, I mean, Andrea's the best, and it was always so efficient and so wonderful, because I usually didn't know who was going to be in the session when I got there in terms of the guest stars, and she got the best people. And so you would come into the thing and you would see who was there that day, and it was like, oh my gosh, this is amazing. And then they would do a read through of it that would be sort of like doing a radio script, where she would have highlighted some of the action directions, and so she would be narrating what was going on, things, and then the actors would have an opportunity to read through those scripts, and so they would go through it rather quickly. I mean, they would pretty much do it in real time, and then she would make whatever notes or adjustments that there were, which were usually minimal, because 90% of it was casting well, and if you cast well, all you have to do is let the actors do their lines. But she would give whatever minimal notes there were, and then we would go in and do the session, and we would do it front to back again, that we would start at the beginning and go through to the end. And occasionally she would stop at one point and say, give me that one again, give me that one with, a little more intensity, a little quieter there, please.
Yeah.
But she would sort of keep it moving along. And then if at the end there were any pickups that we as the writers or the animation people, the directors or Bruce had, we would give her those notes, and she would do pickups at the end. But the whole sessions were very casual, very relaxed, had a very party atmosphere. And as I said before, for me, it was a real thrill, because this was an opportunity to see my work being performed by the best people in the world.
Definitely.
And it was particularly rewarding when you got a reaction out of the actors when they're reading along and they're like, oh my God, that's, or a big laugh or something like that. So, it was really a special experience being at those recordings.
Yeah. Yeah. Now I got to ask, of course, guilty pleasure. Did you ever get to see Frank Welker at any of these sessions?
Oh yes, Frank is a lovely guy. First of all, Frank was always one of the happiest guys to be in the room. He was just like a joy. And then he would open his mouth and these weirdest noises would come out. It was so strange. He could do all sorts of bizarre things. And for the longest time, if you needed a dog, if you needed a grunt, if you needed something, some strange thing, it's like, bring in Frank for that.
Definitely, yeah, and I do agree with you. One of the happiest, most sweetest guys in the business. I've had the pleasure of meeting him a few times, and oh my gosh, he just every time I'm with him, he's like, is your dad here too? Is your papa here?" And he's like right behind me. He's like, he's absolutely ecstatic to see my dad, and it's so wonderful. And when you know who Susan Blue is, right?
Yeah, of course.
She's awesome. I met her at a convention last year in the
Mhm.
UK, and then she was like, "Oh yeah, by the way, Frank wanted me to say hello," and I was like, "Wait, what?" And then she was like, "Yeah, I saw him. Someone I can't remember if they were golfing or something because they both golf. But I was golfing with him, and yeah, I mentioned that I was meeting you next week. He was like, "Oh, you mean Amber? Oh, you've got to say hi to her papa. You've got to meet her papa as well, and you've got to watch your Bill Scott documentary." I was like, "Yo, this is wow, this is just so sweet." And then I met him when I went to Los Angeles. He had no idea that I was coming out to LA. Like he was completely clueless because the last few times I met him, he knew that I was coming
Hmm.
out to see him in the UK.
Hmm.
But then this time he had no idea. So I walked
He
into
just
that
showed up at his
room.
doorstep.
I walked into that. It was at the Marriott in Burbank. I walked up to his table. I was like, "Hi, Frank." He was like, "Amber." I was like, he just he he gives the best hugs. He just gets up from his day. I mean, people say he's very shy. He's private, you know. So you're very lucky to sort of, you know, if you turn up, he'll stand up and he'll come out and give you a hug. He doesn't do that with anyone else at conventions and stuff unless he like properly knows you as a friend. I'm just like, I've made it. I've made it. That's it. I'm done. Thank you. That good night.
Hmm. Very good. Very good.
Yeah, yeah. Now going into sort of the tail end of Warner Brothers DC animated Justice League. What did you do sort of during that sort of period, sort of like the 2005-6 era? Because we'll get on to 2007 in a minute, but I just want to find out what did you sort of work on in between, you know, that sort of time?
Well, I, I mean, we sort of, just would sort of roll from one project into another. And at one point, we had Superman, Batman, and Batman Beyond were all going at the same time. So it was really tough. Then I was working on the Zeta project,
The Zeta
and
Project, yes.
and then uh, and then Justice League started up, and I was in charge of writing for Justice League, and when that wrapped up, it was a very hard job, a very rewarding job, but I needed some time off after that one. So, so I took some time off to sort of recharge my batteries and work on some projects that I had been wanting to do on my own. And I did some pickup scripts for Warner's. I did like some Krypto the Superdog things, but mostly I was sort of taking it easy a little bit.
Yeah, yeah,
Which
yeah.
which was necessary in order to sort of get things going again. So,
Yeah.
I was always working on something, but it was sort of a transitional period, I guess. And sort of
Ah,
since that time, in sort of the, since the early 2000s, most of my work has been done freelance. I haven't been on staff very much since that time, but that's partially because that's the direction that the industry went. That they went from a model of having a staff of writers to relying more on freelance, and that's not always good because it's hard for freelance writers to get up to speed on what the tone and the characters in a show are and stuff like that, and then write one script. It's a lot of work. Whereas when you're on staff, you're basically paid to be living in that world.
yeah.
And like when we were at Warner's, when we weren't working on a particular episode or something like that, we were literally being paid to read comic books and think up stories. And so we were living in that Batman and Superman world. and always thinking about it and always kicking ideas around and stuff like that. So you really sort of get into the deep weeds when you're doing it that way. More recently in animation, they've been bringing staffs back, but only in a more limited sense. That you have the staff together for that show for 10 weeks or 3 months or however long it is, and then you're let go, and then you have to get a staff gig on another show. So there's a lot more sort of floating around that goes on. But during the time when it's sort of the heyday when I was in there, I was very lucky that I was on staff most of the time.
Yeah. Well, I don't know what I'm saying. The reason why I was asking about that sort of period is because you went on to work on Transformers Animated, which was your first sort of foray into the Transformers universe. So what was it like to sort of jump to robots in disguise?
Well, it was interesting, sort of when you're in the business long enough, you miss out on something the first time around. You wait for the merry-go-round to come around again, and you get another shot at it. So, like, I was busy during the first iteration of Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, but I was able to work on a later iteration of that. I worked on Transformers because I was friends with Marty Eisenberg, who was the head writer.
Marty, yes, and he's a really lovely guy.
He's great, and so he brought me in, and I can't say that I was an expert at Transformers, but I really enjoyed that particular one because it was sort of getting back to the early part of the Transformers saga. And we had a wonderful character designer on there named Derek Wyatt, who was a total Transformers head. And so when we had story meetings, we would be talking about ideas that we would be wanting to do with the stories. And because he was our resident Transformers expert, he would say, "Oh, well, that has to be a Bumblebee story because Bumblebee does this and this and this." And we're like, "Great, that's wonderful."
Works for me.
Or this one has to be somebody else. And so we're like, okay, so we were coming up with sort of character stories, and then we would work hand in hand with him in order to sort of meld it into the Transformers universe.
But I'm just saying and I'm just my brain's trying to comprehend, what do I say next? Do I say awesome? How do I sort of bridge it? Did you meet David Kay?
Yeah, sure.
Oh, did you? Oh, he's such a lovely guy, honestly.
Yeah, he's, again, the people who work in voiceover are super talented, super modest, and I find most of them to be very approachable and nice. I mean, they're just delightful people.
Yeah, honestly, like David, he was really sweet when I met him in Burbank. Like we were originally gonna try and meet because I was going to a place the day after the convention, because it was a Transformers convention at TFCon. I was sort of going up the coast, and then David's like, "Oh, well, I live up that way." I'm like, "Wow, that's so cool." And he was like, "Yeah, sure. If you want to, grab a coffee, let me know." And it was like, yeah. So it didn't work out. So he said, "Well, when I come over to TF Nation in August, we'll meet then." And I'm like, "Great. Dude, this is awesome.
Yeah.
Everyone's just so sweet. They have the sweetest personalities, and like they will welcome you with open arms and just give you a nice warm hug. It feels so nice.
Yeah, David has worked on a lot of the shows that Marty's worked on, so the two of them are pretty close.
Yeah. Marty was there as well, so I met him at TFCon. Met a lot of people that day. Yeah. Octonauts. Now, Octonauts, you're working on the Above and Beyond series, right?
Yes.
Or was that Marty? I don't.
Both of us were. We were working together. So, but I actually started on Octonauts 15 years ago or something like that. I guess it was the third season of Octonauts where I got it. And it was a weird thing because my agent called up and said, "Hey, there's this show called Octonauts and they want you to write some scripts for them. And it's a preschool show about undersea stuff." And I was like,
Very popular over here. It is.
yeah. But his pitch for it was not very good. It was sort of like, it did not sound like something that I wanted to work on. He's like, oh, they're trying to do Star Trek underwater. And I'm like, I don't think so. So they asked several times and I turned them down. And finally, they sort of talked me into it. And I looked at it and I was like, this is amazing. I love this. And so during the last 3 seasons of it, I wrote a bunch of episodes for the original iteration of Octonauts. Yeah. And then when they decided they were going to revive it for Above and Beyond, Stephanie, who was the sort of head writer of the original Octonauts, came back on for the first 13 episodes or something like that, just to sort of get it off the ground. And then Marty, and she was working with Kevin Hops, who I've worked with for years and years.
Yeah.
And so I worked on some episodes for them. And then Marty was brought aboard, and he and I ran the writing for the rest of Above and Beyond, which was really one of the best writing experiences that I've had since the Smurfs, actually. It was such a joy to work on Octonauts because not only is it a beautiful show, but because it's so scientifically based, we had to do all this research in order to come up with story ideas. And so a big part of my job, a lot of my job was just sitting there watching sort of National Geographic documentaries and searching for weird animals and weird things that we could build stories around. And one of the things that I sort of was a theme that I was picking up on was how much climate change is affecting all of the species around the planet, and that we really could not dodge that in terms of telling the stories. And so Octonauts Above and Beyond is really the first preschool series that on an ongoing basis deals with not the solutions, but the problems that are encountered by climate change. And I think that it'll be really important in the years to come that children were exposed to that idea very early on, and that it'll be part of the conversation because they will understand it at a sort of base level. And Octonauts was really important for that. So I'm really proud of the fact that we were able to do that, and not in too scary a way for them, or not in too sophisticated a way, but in a very sort of basic way that the climate is changing. It's having this adverse effect on the animals. How can we help these animals?
Wonderful. Yeah, and I think you and Marty have done a really good job at it. Honestly, it's so popular over here. I mean, heck, it's got its own roller coaster ride at a theme park that's in West Midlands. It's such an awesome show. It's like edutainment. I mean, it was around when like I was the age of the target audience, so that when I was 6, 7, so that's how long the show has sort of lasted since.
Yeah. And I just saw that there was like a live stage musical show of Octonauts in Korea last
right. I didn't
week.
hear about that.
Yeah.
Oh,
so it's global in its reach, and a lot of the money actually for Above and Beyond came from China, because apparently it's huge in China. So that's interesting.
Yeah.
But because of the fact that Octonauts, the voice tracks were done in England, we were not able to be there or to meet any of the voice actors on that. But we did hear that Captain Barnacles was a little upset that he was sidetracked in some of the stories there. He was like, I don't have anything to do except to say, let's do this.
I gotta find out, because I've forgotten most of the voice actors. Oh, it's Simon Greenall who voices him. Oh wow, yeah, because you see all these voice actors, and then like I recognize them because they voiced in a lot of shows that I grew up with. But then just like I'm sort of getting into the business myself, so I'm slowly starting to work on sort of these projects and also getting involved with the specific, UK pool of voice actors. And yeah, honestly, yeah, I'm literally just looking through the cast of Octonauts now, and I do recognize a lot of the names in this cast. Very
Yeah,
familiar. Yeah.
they're excellent. They're excellent. So, it's a great show. I really enjoyed working on that.
Yeah. Well, I'm pretty sure that in the in the US version, one of the characters is the voice has been changed. It's a different voice
Yeah,
actor.
that a couple of them actually.
Yeah, it's Wayne
And
Grayson.
that's unfortunate. They changed Dashy's voice because they thought the Australian accent was going to be tough, and they changed Peso's voice for some reason.
Yeah. And
And
was a tweak in the first season.
that was because of Disney. When Disney bought the broadcast rights US to run on the Disney Channel, they for some reason made the decision that, oh, well, this is too British and we need to sort of make it more palatable or something like that. And because of the fact that those episodes existed, then we sort of had to do that dance of, do we want to continue the American voices, or, and I think they did that just to sort of keep options open worldwide, and it sort of makes sense because it is translated into other voices in other languages around the world.
Yeah.
I mean, I happen to prefer the British voices, and I think particularly Dashy's voice has a lot more character with the sort of Australian tinge to it, but it's all good.
Yeah, definitely. Well, Rich, I would like to close off this interview with one final question, if that's okay with you.
Yes.
Sweet. Right. I'd like to ask you, if you do have one, what is your favorite memory of working with Kevin Conroy? Could be meeting him, could be at work, at Comic-Con, maybe.
Well, Kevin was a very private guy. And I mean, he was always delightful in the sessions, but he was also sort of all work, that he would come in and he was very much a serious actor. Yeah. But at one of the Emmy ceremonies, I introduced him to my mother, who was there, and he just took her under his wing and was just like her date for the evening. He just was so nice to her and so charming, and she was just like in awe of him. And I thought it was really the nicest thing that he could have possibly done. And sort of to our earlier conversation, that's how these voice actors are, that they're just very welcoming and very nice. But I always appreciate that he did that.
That must have been such a cool memory for your mom as well.
Yes. Oh, she talked about him for years afterwards.
Oh, years? It happened. Oh, I thought it might have been only about a couple of years ago. How long ago was that?
No, that was in the 1990s, late 1990s.
Oh, right. Okay. I thought it was like sort of the 2010s, or maybe like when you said years ago, I presume like sort of when Justice League was going on. Wow. I need to see if have you got any photos from that then? Because like I'd love to see photos of like different Emmy events to do with the DC animated stuff.
Yeah, I don't know if I do. We didn't have time to take a lot of pictures.
It was worth an ask. Rich, thank you so much for coming on my podcast. It's been such a pleasure to talk to you.
Very nice to meet you, Amber, and good luck with all of your projects.
Thank you, and good luck to you as well with your writing career. Where can we find you on social media? Do you have a website? Have you got anything you'd like to promote, a show that you're working on at the moment? If you can, NDAs,
I'm not real active in social media. I mean, if you really look for me, you can find me, which you did. But no, I don't have a big social media presence. And I don't have anything to promote right now at the moment. I'm working on a book that is a sort of my second novel. So at some point that will come out. My first one is called A Diamond in the Rough, and it's about a retelling of the Snow White story set in the world of minor league baseball in the 1950s.
Awesome. Wow. Well, I'll try and get that linked in the description if it's on sale. You know, any
It's on Amazon.
Is it on Amazon? Okay, cool. I'll link that in the description. Well, in that case, to you at home, thank you so much for watching this episode of In Conversation with ATF with the lovely Rich Fogel. I hope you loved watching it as much as I did filming it. With that, thank you for watching. Like, comment, subscribe, and we will see you very soon. So it's goodbye from me and goodbye from Rich. Take care.
Bye.
Bye and cut.
Excellent.